Hi, and welcome to our Facebook Live. I'm Jasmine Garst. I'm the correspondent for Across Women's Lives from Public Radio International and PRI's The World. This week on The World and PRI.org, we've been digging really deep into the garment industry and the realities of what is called fast fashion. And my reporting for this series has taken us everywhere, from Los Angeles to North Carolina, Bangladesh. We spent a lot of time in Bangladesh, and we've been speaking to garment factory workers about what their lives are like. Joining me right now is Elizabeth Cline. Elizabeth Cline is the author of Overdressed, The Shockingly High Cost of Cheap Fashion. The book has been called a sharp wake-up call. It's an excellent book if you're interested in this topic. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And I'd love to welcome our audiences on Facebook right now. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Questions for me about my reporting, and of course, questions for Elizabeth, who is an expert on this topic. Elizabeth, let's get started. You weren't always... You had this moment, right? You had this aha moment. You were going through your closet, you were evaluating the clothes you had. What was this aha moment? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I had this kind of rather embarrassing epiphany. I used to be kind of a cheap fashion addict. I tried to pay the lowest price possible for clothes, and I had a lot of clothing. And I guess for me, the turning point was this day when I went into a Kmart in Manhattan and I bought 7 pairs of $7 shoes. I really liked this pair of shoes, and I was like, well, they'll probably wear out, so maybe I should just stock up. And it was on my train ride home that day. I live in New York, when I started to think about what the hidden environmental and social impacts might be of my shopping habits, and it set me on this path to find answers for myself and for people around me, because obviously I'm not the only person that consumes this way.
What does your closet look like today?
That's a great question. I would say it certainly got a lot less in it than it used to. I shop secondhand a lot. I'm really big on buying for quality. I shop a lot more carefully. I think that's really the big difference. There's no more just going into a store and buying whatever I see first that's got the lowest price and kind of looks cute. I take my time. I'm really careful in my purchases. But I also want to say that a lot of the problems in the fashion industry are not really about shopping or voting with your dollars. We need systemic change to really tackle these problems. So I don't want to put all of the burden on consumers' shoulders either.
You know, one of the most memorable parts of the book is when you would go on these trips to China and Bangladesh, and you would pretend to be a designer looking for a factory. Were you nervous doing that?
Yeah, I was really nervous, especially in China, just because there's so much censorship of the media. It's not a democracy. And I wasn't sure what the stakes were. And it doesn't feel good to mislead people in general, but I thought it was important first for my safety, and then also just to get some sort of honest, portrayal of what's going on in the factories that I was visiting.
And just for viewers who haven't read the book, what kind of questions were you asking? Like, were you pushing to see how much you could get away with?
No, I think for me, what I wanted to convey in the book is that people we have this caricature in our mind of what a sweatshop is, that it's full of, 8-year-olds chained to a sewing machine, but really, all a sweatshop is people working overtime for poverty wages, which is unfortunately the standard for garment workers. You can work 100 hours a week and still not have enough money to put your kids in school, to pay for health care. That was what I wanted to convey, was that, you can walk into a sweatshop and it's just going to look like a normal place of business. And I really wanted to dig into how normalized that economic exploitation has become in the era of fast fashion.
Yeah, you know, that's really interesting. That's exactly what I found in my recent trip to Bangladesh. It's like the egregiousness of it lies in the fact that it's so common. It's
Yeah.
just so average. Everyone there is working like 18-hour days for no money. And you know, actually we have a clip of the what we saw in Bangladesh. You know, Elizabeth, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's almost like this sense among the consumer that there's like no way out of this. Like, you know, there's no way to find a brand that is not somehow involved in this. And I also think some consumers might look at you and at me and think, well, you know, I worked, I don't know, in a high-powered law firm or something, and I need to look really sharp every day. That's part of getting ahead. So it's just impossible not to somehow be involved. Like, even as we were doing this series, people in the newsroom would approach me, or audiences would approach me and say, you know, I just feel like, what am I supposed to do? I need to buy a pair of socks. What do you say to that?
I think there are two pieces of it. If you're talking about the sustainability and the environmental impact of the fashion industry, that's very easy as a consumer to do something about. You know, I am often trying to get people to just recycle clothes, donate clothes instead of throwing them away. You know, care for your clothes, keep them for as long as possible. These sort of like old-fashioned, you know, time-honored ways of valuing and caring for clothes, I do think need to be resurrected. But I think that what you're hearing from people is, to a large degree, true. Our fashion choices are completely controlled by huge corporations, and they've just become more and more narrow over the last 10 to 15 years, which is why I think that, you know, some of this is going to have to be solved through our power as citizens and not through the way that we shop. And, you know, I think that we all wear clothes, we all buy clothes, and, you know, the vast majority of us do shop in these powerful brands. And yeah, we need to hold them responsible for their business practices.
I just want to take a second for audiences and listeners who are tuning in just now. My name is Jasmine Garst. I am the correspondent for Across Women's Lives with Public Radio International, and we're doing a Facebook Live with Elizabeth Cline. She is an expert and an author on fashion, on the fashion industry and what it is doing to the planet and what it is doing to the people who make our fashion. And we are going to go ahead and take some listener questions. So, one question that I have, for example, is when you're talking about taking care of clothing the old-fashioned way, what are you talking? Are you saying like don't go to the laundromat, or tell me a little bit more about that?
So consumer studies show that we're wearing clothes about 7 times on average before moving on to something else or pushing it to the back of our closet. So part of what I mean is just trying to buy clothes a little bit more carefully with the intention of wearing them for longer. And I don't mean you have to keep them for the rest of your life. But certainly kind of looking for pieces that have more versatility and something that you wouldn't mind wearing longer for a season. And I also think that, you know, I work in the secondhand industry now, and I see that I feel like people have kind of given up on even bothering to remove stains, sew a button back on, remove pills, get the yellow out of the collar of a shirt. These are all things that are actually quite easy to do, but I think people kind of get overwhelmed by it, or they say, well, it's just as easy to go out and buy another $5 shirt. And, you know, as a result of that, we have 25 billion pounds of textile waste being generated in the United States now, and it's going up every year because of fast fashion and because of people's disposable attitudes towards clothes. So as consumers, we have a lot of power to flip that piece of this problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, when I was reporting in Bangladesh, I went to this market. It's called Nahar market, and it's where all these big companies send their faulty or their flawed items of clothing. Like there's a missed button, there's a hem that hasn't been sewed right. And I would look at these like Calvin Klein's, Abercrombie and Fitch, Zara, Mango, and I couldn't spot the mistake. I just couldn't spot what the flaw was. And I felt like that said a lot about the consumer and how picky the consumer has gotten.
I think too, though, that brands, you know, there's a lot of pre-consumer textile waste, which is what you were seeing, which are so-called flawed products. There's a lot of clothes that are just being destroyed before they're even sold, or, you know, dumped on the developing world. The fashion industry has just gotten really, really wasteful. And one thing that really terrifies me is that global clothing consumption is just going to continue to go up. And just the carbon impact of the fashion industry is supposed to increase by another 60% over the next 10 years if we don't figure out a different way to, you know, manufacture all of this stuff.
On that point, on this increased kind of gargantuan appetite for clothing, you spent time with something that's called haulers. It's YouTube personalities that, like, they just go into a why don't you explain it, actually?
Yeah, haul videos are really fascinating. You know, it's kind of started happening around the same time as fast fashion chains were coming into the U.S. and cropping up around. I mean, even in the UK and Western Europe too. But the idea is you try to buy as much clothing or beauty products, makeup, accessories, and then you show it all off on YouTube, and you're kind of like, look how little I paid for all of this. I mean, I'm not wagging a finger at people about this, because this was my mentality before writing the book. It's like we've been so disconnected from clothes. You know, it's like we think that they just are made by elves on the other side of the planet, wind up magically in stores. We don't really think about it. And yeah, haul videos are just kind of one fascinating byproduct of that psychology.
You know, I wonder if in all your work and in the research you were doing for writing this book, you went into, you know, I'm thinking about your 7 pairs of shoes for $7, and there's this phrase in America that doesn't really exist in the rest of the world, which is retail therapy. And I'm wondering if you kind of had time to ponder and look into like the emotional connection that Americans make between like this shop till you drop, hauling, and the actual act of buying.
Yeah, I mean, American consumerism is, you know, it's a very, very strong, very real part of our culture. It dates back to the post-war period. And at a certain point in time, you know, I think we felt like it was our civic duty to shop and to support the economy through consumption. But I think that a lot of people are starting to realize that we're not getting a whole lot out of it anymore. I mean, let's take, for example, the 2 million garment and textile jobs that we lost in the process of globalization. You know, let's look at the Los Angeles garment workers who are making $5 an hour sewing clothes for brands like Ross. We have, I think, lost far more than we've gained through all of this cheap stuff, and people are, I think, waking up to that. And we also know from consumer studies that the rush that you get from buying something new actually wears off very quickly. And I mean, if people are looking to have a more satisfying wardrobe, I just like can't emphasize enough how important it is to just shop, really go out there and try to find something that you're really happy with and that you really are excited to wear, because that's what makes it satisfying to kind of open the closet door in the morning and, you know, and get dressed. It's not the shopping.
And we have a listener question about vintage used clothing, but before we go to that, I want to say hi to our Facebook audiences and our our listeners who are tuning in. My name is Jasmine Garzd. I am the correspondent for the Across Women's Lives series. It's on PRI Public Radio International. And we have a question from Alex Newman. She says, Elizabeth, you say that you shop secondhand, and in the book you talk a lot about the different kinds of stitching and hems that some vintage clothing has. If we're shopping for secondhand, what should we be looking for, and how does someone who doesn't know anything about sewing, like myself, identify something that's good quality? And I think that question goes beyond vintage. Like, how can you identify what's good quality?
Yeah, so that's such a great question, and I know how that feels, because before writing Overdressed, I would just walk into a store and I wouldn't know what to look for. And I think that learning to recognize quality is a journey, and I think that that's the first thing that people should just go easy on themselves. It's gonna, take time, and the fact that you're even thinking about it and looking for it is the first step. And the second thing I would say is that more than stitching, which is, kind of difficult if you're new to this, fabric is the foundation of quality. So something really easy you can do is just always make sure you look at the label on clothes and see what kind of fabric that item is made out of, because it's often the first giveaway that a company is trying to cut corners. If you pick up a sweater and it's made out of acrylic instead of a wool blend or cotton blend, you can probably surmise that that company is trying to just produce something at a certain price point, and they're not really concerned about how it feels on your skin or how it washes or wears. So fabrication label is your first kind of, it's the doorway into this world of quality.
That is so interesting. No, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Like, look at the fabric, look at the percentage. I want to remind our listeners that we're taking questions, and we have about 5 minutes left. 5 minutes. So bring those questions in. Elizabeth, on the question of quality, I think that there's people make this correlation between price tag and quality. I think most consumers, if they see a jacket for 20 bucks, they assume, okay, there's probably some exploitation going on here. But the flip side of that is, I think most consumers see, I don't know, a pair of designer jeans for $200, and they think, okay, everyone in the supply chain is benefiting from this. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point, that you can't rely on price alone. There's no direct line between something that's ethically made and the price point, or vice versa, which is where, consumer education is so important. Also, just for protecting your bottom line and your bank account, you want to know that you're buying something that's well made and also was made responsibly. And I think you're absolutely right. It's like sometimes you'll flip that pair of designer jeans inside out, and it's like, this is also made in China with a poly rayon cotton blend. Why is it $200 or $300? And I think that people's instinct to question that is pretty spot on.
So we have a question, or actually we have a comment from Aja Barber, from listener Aja Barber, who says, I'm not sure how keen I am on H&M burning their clothing. Maybe just stop manufacturing so much.
Yeah, that was, I completely agree. So there was this investigation done last month, I think, in Denmark, that showed that H&M is in the habit of incinerating clothes, and they say that they're clothes that have some sort of toxicity issue. They're things that can't be sold. I'm not sure what to believe, but I agree. And H&M is, they have this recycling in-store recycling program on the one hand, but here they are incinerating unsold clothes. And I mean, can you imagine too, being a worker who manufactures H&M clothes, and then you find out that they're destroyed before they ever even land in the stores?
That feels a little bit like it could be given even to the workers, right? So we have about 2 minutes left, and I definitely want to give you a chance to talk about the documentary you're currently working on. It's about textile waste. So can you tell us more about the project and where we can catch it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the process of making my first documentary. It's about the secret world of secondhand clothing. The vast majority of clothes that we donate in the United States and in the Western world in general ends up being exported to the developing world, which is something that most consumers are not aware of. So it connects the story from, the charity shop down the street, all the way to Africa, South America, Eastern Europe. And we're in the process of shooting it, and I hope that it will come out in 2019.
That sounds like everyone who is tuning into this Facebook Live is probably going to want to watch that.
Yeah, I hope so.
Elizabeth Cline is the author of Overdressed, the shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. If this is a topic that your interest is suddenly piqued by, or you've always been interested by that, I really recommend that you pick up this book. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Jasmine Garst. I am the reporter for Across Women's Lives. We are brought to you by Public Radio International and PRI's The World, and I really hope you tune in all this week to The World. Check out your local station listings. We are doing a documentary about the fashion industry, what it's doing to the planet, what it's doing to workers. Most of them are women. Check us out. We are PRI.org. We're Across Women's Lives. Thank you so much for joining me.